Welcome to Scribbler to Scribe. I'm your host, David Scribbler Wishart, and I'm joined by my co-host, resident scribe, Pastor Ronnie Smith from Peace Lutheran Church. We invite you on a spiritual journey to explore questions of faith in the human experience. If you're searching for more meaning in your life, you're not alone. So join us as we search for wisdom and personal growth through a theological lens.
I think like the best organizations in the world too, they perform well because they take the time to carry, the slowest people in the group, and they, or whatever it is, and they lift each other up, and they have that support network, they have that trust. Good, healthy families have that as well. Whereas toxic environments don't, right? Like everybody's trying to just get one up on each other, and they just end up tearing one another apart. You have no trust. You got to sleep with one eye open, like all these kind of things. So it's, but unfortunately, it means that you have to lead by example and put yourself out there and risk being exploited in some way. I want to say we just in one of the services a couple of weeks ago, that was one of the readings talked about that. Like maybe I'm thinking of something else, but just basically
talked about what, sorry?
Well, just like you could, what is the line? It's like, even if they don't accept your kindness, like show kindness anyway, or if they
A little bit of Mother Teresa in there.
That's what it was. Yeah, it was a Mother Teresa quote. Yeah, I can't think of what it is. If you can rattle it off, even better. But
something like if you're kind, people might suspect you of ulterior motives. Be kind anyways,
yes.
and things. Whole list like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons not to do good things, I guess, but do them anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose that ties in. You asked earlier about some examples from faith. Jesus is always talking about, I think it's Mark 8. I've never been good at memorizing those things, but if any want to follow me, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. So this denying yourself, denying instant gratification for longer term rewards, I guess, if you will, like a richer life because you've denied your craving kind of thing.
Yeah.
But right now we're in a world that's instant gratification central. It's really the world's ethos right now. And COVID has kind of disrupted that to a noticeable degree, where we've all had to become more empathetic beings again.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see how long we're able to hold on to that collective empathy, and how long before things go back to just greed and selfishness.
Well, why do you think that it falls into that? Like, what is it? It seems like when you think about all the stories, like in the Bible, for example, that humanity seems to trend in that direction inevitably. Like we've had these bouts of, depravity, and then sort of reformation and restoration, and then it falls apart again. Like it's like a cycle.
Right.
Why is this natural tendency towards, I don't know what to call it, entropy, I guess?
Well, right now, I would say the arc of history, recent history, kind of looks like this. So we had World War II. Sort of really, really shaped the whole century, essentially. It was a war so great. But World War II, that generation sacrificed everything. There was scarcity, there was war, there was refugees everywhere, all kinds of destruction, lives shattered. That generation really had it tough. And then after the post-war period, there was this huge economic boom. And then, the rise of the middle class and things like this. And that's where we started to see consumerism really take off. You had things like TV now, and you could advertise products and things like that. And, over the course of the subsequent decades, that sort of excess, that surplus, that abundance, it just sort of perpetuated itself more and more and more. And then by the time you got to like the 60s, I guess you had this really countercultural revolution, this cultural revolution in the West, at least, where people's priorities completely changed, and they were sort of opposite to, that golden generation in a sense. There was a lot of, Vietnam War and things like that were pretty intense, and there was a lot of bad stuff going on, but there was this sort of massive youth that really changed the culture. And they did a lot of really good stuff, civil rights in the 60s, some landmark moments, things like Martin Luther King and what have you. But yet, as that sort of generation sort of matured and we went through the 70s and 80s, there was kind of this sort of excess culture. And we just wanted to consume more and more and more, and there were more products available all the time. And we went really hard at doing that for a good 50, 60 years without stop. And eventually, it was unsustainable. That level of individual consumption, that level of individual gratification, we think of like the polluting that we've done in the past in that time as well, and how individualistic all our lives had become in some kind of way. And now we're kind of seeing we saw the extreme of that sort of pendulum. So, from the golden generation, sacrifice everything, to rampant individualism. I want everything and I don't need anybody else. It's all about me. Now we're starting to swing back from that extreme. World's growing more empathetic again and moving somewhere towards the middle. We're still kind of feeling our way through it. We don't really know how it's going to shake out yet, but we know that there's a transition happening. And a lot of it comes down to just, our survival depends on it. Depends on us working together to solve global problems. It's not enough to think about your own country anymore, or your town, and make that your sole identity piece. We're really a global family. We have to really wrap our minds around thinking about it that way. And that's where, church has a really important place to, even still, even in an age where, it's sort of fallen out of popularity in a lot of sense. It's still one of the last sort of harbingers of community, I guess, intentional on promoting community-minded thinking in the participants. And we all have our sort of areas of interest and things like that, but one of the great values that people miss or underappreciate, I guess, is just the strength that you get by being in community, particularly a community that's intent on exploring spirituality and faith and these kinds of things. There's just a deepness about that that you don't get at, the community center, I guess, if you're going out to ping pong or something like that. Mm-hmm. Which is great too. I love ping pong, and I encourage everybody to do whatever they're into. But there's just sort of another level at play when you're gathering for sort of spiritual purposes. And it's not just the church. I'm sure the Buddhists would say the same thing, and the Muslims and the Jews. There's something about this religious community building that really works in a person's life in really remarkable and often mysterious ways.
Would you say that many of the religions are probably more similar than they are different. Like more similarities in what they teach than there are differences in what they have to say.
Well, the more that I study and learn about other religions, I find that to be true. Ultimately, we're all trying to preach love in one variation or another, compassion, kindness, spiritual health. I'm not here to say mine's better than the next person, but it wasn't that long ago where that was really the prevailing attitude. You know, like Catholics and Protestants have been fighting for years. Israelis and Palestinians have been fighting for years, so on and so forth. But what this time really calls for is a diversity in thinking, I guess, around those things. Again, this moving towards a higher identity, a more global identity, where we don't see enemies in left everywhere we turn, you know?
It's just about not caring about being right all the time, whatever that is. I think that the pursuit of science has one of the advantages of it maybe over religion, or why religion gets maybe lost sometimes compared to science, is that science is really like the pursuit of knowledge and pushing the boundaries of what we don't know. And that it isn't about, like, as much as it is about finding out truth, it's really is like about forming a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis. And even if it's wrong, rather than holding on to it and trying to make it right, it's just a process of elimination. And you kind of find out, okay, this is the wrong path, or this is the right one, but not holding on to that. And it's just about the advancement of knowledge. And it isn't about what knowledge is advanced. It's just about the collective group of knowledge. Now, a bunch of people in the scientific community have their own ways of, manipulating data or whatever the case may be to tell the story that they want to tell. And they're sort of charlatans, I guess, in some ways that they do that. But I'd say, like, in religion has done some bad things in the past too, of just sort of like almost like just, and you said this, like, the Bible can be a very dangerous book when we're not there to try to solve it, right? But maybe people put their finger on it and say, this is what it means, and there is no other explanation. And it is very dangerous when you do that. I think what's really neat about what you've said before, though, is that it's like, well, we can never really know, like, what this message means. It can mean many things. And so we may never be able to pinpoint exactly what its meaning is. And you know what? That's okay. The idea that we should try to solve everything is maybe a bit of a farce in and of itself. It's just, the thinking's wrong, because it's sort of suggesting like that's the higher virtue, but really it isn't about the end. It's just about the journey. So
Yeah, you mentioned truth and you talked about science and religion. I don't know if this is accurate, but seems like science is interested in finding fact, irrefutable, like this is a fact, and religion sort of tries to more target truth, and truth is very subjective, and
ironically,
and again, it can be very dangerous with what we do with that. But I heard a story, and I may butcher it, but kind of a parable on what is truth. So I forget how many there were, but let's say there are 3 people that are blindfolded, and they're all touching an elephant. One of them is holding the nose, one of them is touching the ear, one of them has the tail. And they're all asked, okay, well, what's an elephant like? And the person with the nose is like, well, it's kind of slimy. It's got a couple of holes in it. This is what an elephant is about, or like, looks like. And then the second guy is like, no, it's like floppy and like and rough and really big. The guy that's holding the ear.
Mhm.
And then the next person, and you can do this however many people you want.
Yeah.
Next person's holding the tail. He's like, no, the elephant is like like a puff of fur with like a long rod on it or something, whatever they say. Ultimately, they're all right. They're all describing the part of the elephant that they're touching. But neither of those answers is the whole truth, I guess, if you will. And so I guess that's very instructive to us, right? Like, even though, we have a particular religion, we might only be holding on to the tusk or something like that.
Yeah.
And the Muslims are holding on to the tail. However you want to dice that up. Truth is such a subjective thing. But I think religion sort of tries to answer that question more than what is fact. And science is kind of the other way around. But however, the good news is these are not two mutually exclusive ideas. And we're finding out, in fact, that they really complement and supplement each other in really surprising ways. And I think our Lenten series revealed a lot of that.
Oh, for sure. What Dave McGinley had to say was totally fascinating, and I think it's refreshing that he kind of combines religion, spirituality, and science together. And reading Hawking's book, like, he brings up God quite a bit, about the birth of the universe and everything. And there's still so many unexplained things that are out there, right? And so there's a lot of room for God in that picture. So it's interesting when one of the foremost scientists and thinkers of our time brings that up. You kind of wonder where atheism really would it drove it, but I think that's almost maybe more of a nihilistic type thing than anything. But before we dig into maybe that topic,
yeah, I don't mean to bash atheists in any kind of way. Do you, atheists out there. But I find that a lot of atheists come to that viewpoint because they're sort of as a reaction against an experience that they've had, probably in organized religion. And I don't hold that against them. If you've been burned by the church in some kind of way, I totally get it. And I'm not here to try to talk you out of it. Like, you have every right to not accept some of the things that the church has done. But this is a time where the church itself needs to repent. The church preaches repentance a lot, but people need to see it from the church itself to sort of begin to regain that trust and heal those wounds.
For sure. Yeah, I think that the some religion can be so dogmatic, and I think that's really turns a lot of people off from it as well. Like, an open-minded religion is very different than like dogmatic one, and it's the same with science, right? Like, the open-minded science versus like a dogmatic pursuit of one theory that towers over everything else. And reading Hawking, he talks about general relativity, which was discovered by Einstein, right? And so this is the theory of like gravity, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the speed of light, all that kind of stuff. But that general relativity didn't do a good job of explaining things that are really small, right? And that's when quantum mechanics was developed, and the discovery of the atom and stuff. And so general relativity was this massive discovery when it happened, and then a little while later quantum mechanics came around, and then the two theories they can't quite reconcile them. And I'm not sure where the science stands on that now, but it's just interesting that these two things can be there. And what happens is people end up in one school or the other, schools of thought about how it all works. And like, my area of expertise in economics is it's rampant for that, of people who are these economic schools of thought, right? And then this is the way it works, and it's like, oh my gosh, why do we have to even have it like and what it is it's weird, almost more weird in science and economics. There's political reasons why people want it to be that way, and they have their own vested economic interest in it being explained a certain way or whatever. But which I think brings up another good point of just like, understanding people's motivations and the communications and what they say to you, and if their intentions are pure or not. And I think that, what drives me to you, for example, is like, I think there's no, like, I think you're an open book. Like there's no like ulterior motives or anything there. Like it's all just, you're just open, transparent person and speak from the heart. And so I think that's really important in the line of work, that you do in particular, but just as a person in general, that's good value to espouse every day. So, but there's people.
Thanks, man.
There are people like you encounter certain days who something there that just kind of rubs you, rubs you the wrong way a little bit. And it's not that you shouldn't give people a chance, but you do have to guard yourself too, right? Don't be too naive. But
sure. Yeah, we're called to serve one another. Doesn't mean we're not called to be suckers.
Yes.
But you were talking about sort of opposing ideas there at one point, and just sort of reminded me of, I think it was Kant or Kant, however people pronounce it. I pronounce it Kant. He sort of introduced this idea of dialectic processes. So you have two extreme ideas, or you have a thesis and an antithesis that sort of battle it out. And this is human history. This is everything we've ever done. So thesis, antithesis, eventually you get synthesis, and then a new way sort of presents itself. And I think we're in that synthesis. We're in a period of synthesis right now. It's still early, but we're in a period of synthesis where we're trying to, that golden age I talked about, that World War II sort of paradigm that was created, the post-war paradigm, that model was extremely good at building communities from a church perspective. Mm-hmm. The church was cranking out new churches left, right, and center in the 50s and 60s. But what they did was they were really good at sort of building what I guess is called a convergent society, where the question is the same for everyone and the answer is the same for everyone. But that worked really well for a number of decades, but then the world changed, and then this rampant individualism sort of took off, as we mentioned. So you had this one extreme of extreme community where everybody thinks the same thing and looks the same and all of that, to the other extreme, which is everybody in it for themselves, everyone is self-made, and everyone doesn't need anybody else, and just get more and more stuff for yourself. Now we're seeing that doesn't work. We're seeing the limits of that way of thinking, and we're really starting to come back together in a more divergent, what they call divergent environment now. So the question might be the same for everyone, who is God, what have you, but the answer is different for everyone. Even something like who is Jesus in any given congregation, you'll get a variety of answers on what that means. And so I guess I've been able to recognize this since getting into ministry. So, but one of the things I try to do now then is how do we merge community and individual? So how do we have communal expressions in an individual way? And so one example of this is when we do the Lord's Prayer. I always say, whichever language or variation you're most comfortable with. A lot of times we have immigrants in our churches who English is second language. Some people got used to certain versions of it, what have you. So rather than trying to make everybody say it the same way, like we used to, now we can all do the same thing together in our own way. So you can use the words that are most comforting to you. I can use my words, and we're all sort of. I just find that there's this really interesting sort of mix that happens when we all do that. That's really it feels very dynamic to do it that way.
Mhm.
And there's lots of other examples of that too, but that's just one way. So the time now calls for solutions like that. How do we balance this community piece and the individual piece? Or how do we bring people together in community and not try to make them all the same?
Yeah, it's when you talked about that, the image that came to mind is like, say, since World War II, put a stake a nail in that period of time, now wrap a rubber band around it, and we have pulled on that rubber band since, right, to the point where it's just about to snap. So we've stretched it really far, and we've gained a lot through that period, good and bad. So of different, civil rights, recognizing people from different walks of life and lifestyles, and colors of your skin or sexual orientation or whatever the case may be, like all this stuff that wasn't acceptable back then in the 50s. So they had this great community as long as you were exactly the same as everybody else.
Right.
But if you weren't, you were, you had a tortured existence, right? And now we've made it so that we're a lot more accepting of individual characteristics, but we have no sense of community support. We
Right.
feel like a lot, very more like left out in the cold, alone, this sort of barren environment, dog eat dog type thing.
And
It's,
everyone's got tunnel vision for their own lane.
so it's got a, like a rubber band, it has to come back, at some point. And where do we stretch ourselves just enough without, but not so far that we're at, the slightest thing could cause us to snap, right? There's no buffer.
Yeah, speaking of that generation, World War II generation, you can tell we're sort of at the end of that, as that generation dies off, people slowly start to forget what World War II was all about, to the point now where you're seeing things down in the States, open racism, open violence, open divisions, open hatred, all kinds of crazy stuff. If this was a different system, and that spirit swept in, I don't know that the protections would have been in place. So like in interwar Germany, the reparations from World War I were so crushing, really built up this resentment and hostility that Hitler was able to capitalize on and whip them into a froth and then unleash them on the world. But a lot of that same spirit was in the movement we saw down in the South, the Tea Party president, I guess, if you will, openly sort of stoking those divisions. If they were in a country where there weren't all these checks and balances on government, and you let a spirit like that remain unchecked, then you get things like World War II. But it's really telling just how much people have forgot why World War II happened and all the repercussions of that. Our collective memory is getting foggy. I guess we're starting to forget that time. And then soon enough, that generation will be completely gone. And we'll continue to slip in that regard. So we have to be sort of vigilant as a society, not to let hatred drive the narrative. We hope you found your time nourishing and life-giving. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. If you would like to hear more and support the podcast and Peace Lutheran Church, please consider donating at the link in the description. For DW, I'm Pastor Ronnie Smith. Peace be with you.